Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Hope so you are fine, and hope so the previous lectures were also clear to you. Okay, now today let us start with a concept related to stress, which is known as fight or flight. As the name indicates, fight means to face the situation, to remain in the situation, and fight. And flight means to flee, to run away, to avoid the situation. Now this concept was introduced by Professor Walter Cannon. And according to him, this response is used by individuals to avoid danger. He opines means that he is of the opinion. Usually people, they show this response in order to avoid the dangerous situation. Either they remain in the situation, they fight, or they flee from that particular situation. Now both these systems, actions, fighting and flighting, they both affect our physiological system completely. Either we run away, either we stay in the situation and fight. Both accompany certain physiological changes which occur in our body. Now there are 4 stages of fight or flight reaction. First stage is that our brain receives the message through the senses. According to the situation, our brain receives the message. Second stage is that our brain interprets that message. Now first stage is relevant with the sensation. Second stage is relevant with the perception. We understand what this situation is all about. Is it a dangerous situation or it is not a dangerous situation? If it is a dangerous situation, then should we stay in that particular situation or we should fly away from that particular situation? Okay, so first we sense it, then we interpret it. Then the third stage is that the organism remains in the state of arousal until the danger has passed. As I have already told you that whenever there is emergency situation, there is, due to that situation, whether we fight or whether we flight, there is the physiological arousal, there is physiological disturbance in our body. So we remain, whatever the step we take, but we remain in the physiological arousal. And in the fourth stage, if the danger has gone, then we come back to our normal state of rest. But if the danger persists, means that it stays longer, then there are chances of different diseases attacking the individual. If danger remains there and we are unable to cope up with the danger, then there are chances that we are going to suffer from certain physiological diseases, ailments. Now another concept which is very closely relevant to stress is general adaptation syndrome. General adaptation syndrome, the concept was given by Hans Selye. And according to this concept, when the stress stimulus does not disappear and continues to threaten, then individual suffers from general adaptation syndrome. It is, you can say, a form or type of a disease. So, as in the fourth stage of fight or flight reaction, I told you, when the danger persists, it stays longer and it does not vanish, then individuals suffer from certain physiological disturbances. So general adaptation syndrome is like that physiological disturbance which occurs when stress stimulus does not disappear and it continues to threaten. Now Hans Selye conducted research on rats and concluded 3 styles of this reaction. First style is alarm reaction, second style is stage of resistance, and the third style is stage of exhaustion. The first is the alarm reaction. Now individual first encounters shock, shows sign of emergency. First individual sees the situation, interprets it, and if it is the emergency situation, then he shows signs of emergency. He shows some urgency. The fight or flight reaction occurs at this stage, and consequently all the systems of organism are stimulated and aroused. So, as the individual has sensed and perceived the situation, now what will be the reaction of the individual? Either he will stay or he will flee. So, fight or flight reactions, they occur at the stage of alarm reaction of general adaptation syndrome, where all the systems of the individual are stimulated and aroused. Second style of general adaptation syndrome is stage of resistance. Now, again, either we resist or we confront. If the danger does not pass, that changes occurred during previous stage continue at low intensity. Now, if the danger remains in that particular situation, we are in an emergency situation, then the changes that are taking place in our physiology, in our body, they continue to occur. They continue to occur at the low pace, at the low intensity. Individual wants to return to the state of rest with the help of different hormones. You see, you might remember that in first year we studied that there are two very important hormones that are released during emergency situation. One is the epinephrine and the other one is the norepinephrine. So, epinephrine works under emergency situation, and when the emergency situation is over, then norepinephrine takes the charge and it starts its work. So, when the individual wants to return to the state of rest, then it means that norepinephrine starts its function. And then is the stage of exhaustion. Now, if the stressful situation continues for an extended period of time, the resistance continues. Now, if the stressful situation continues for an extended period of time, the resistance continues. The more we are fighting in the stressful situation, we are trying to cope with that, we are resisting. It means that all the disturbed physiology of our body is working more and more. So what happens that our metabolic system cannot function for long. It cannot fight with the stressful situation for a longer period of time. So what happens that individual collapses as it cannot function under lingering stress situation, lingering continued long-term stressful situation. So the individual collapses. Collapses means that individual suffers from chronic diseases, from other physiological disturbances, and even some situation there are chances of death of individual as well. Adrenal and pituitary gland cannot secrete hormones for a long time. Adrenal gland, it secretes a hormone which that is epinephrine and norepinephrine. So epinephrine cannot work continuously for a longer period of time to face or cope with the emergency situation. So the system, all the physiological system collapses and individual suffers from certain diseases. That is why it is known as stage of exhaustion. If in the previous stage, which is stage of resistance, the stressful situation is over, then individual comes back to the normal life. If that stressful situation is not over, then the stage of exhaustion comes, where the individual gets exhausted, completely tired, while continuously facing the long-term stressful situation. Now, what are the changes that take place during general adaptation syndrome? Adrenal cortex becomes large. Now, adrenal cortex usually secretes a hormone, and that hormones, and it also secretes sugar. So, due to the continuous secretion of that hormone, the cortex becomes enlarged. The secretion of stress hormone continues uninterruptedly. The stress hormone is cortisol. Now, it continues to get secreted due to the long-term stress. Lymphatic glands are either constricted or destroyed. Lymphatic glands are our white blood cells, you can say, and they work to help our immune system to fight against some external threats, diseases. Number of leukocytes decreases. Leukocytes are our white blood cells. So under long-term stress, they also get destroyed. Their number decreases, and the stomach develop ulcer. And you're very well familiar with the ulcer. That ulcer, it affects our stomach and intestines, and there are so many types of ulcers. So there is very close relationship between ulcer, stress and ulcer. Usually under continuous stress, people, they develop ulcer. Now, psychological effects of stress. Stress does not accompany physiological effects only. There are certain psychological effects of stress as well, which are very common in your ordinary life. Like stress affects individuals' power of reasoning and cannot focus thoughts and attention on one point. Very a simple example is your test and exam anxiety. When you get stressful because of the upcoming test or exam, then despite the fact that you have remembered everything, you cannot perform in the required manner. Fine. And so many times that it happens that despite very good preparation, students, they fail in that paper or in that exam. What is the reason? Because they take a lot of stress of that upcoming exam, and due to stress they lose their power of reasoning, concentration, and then they forget whatever they have remembered. Now, individuals usually become aggressive during stress, and mostly it happens that when we are unable to cope up with the stressful situation, then aggression is induced, aggression is caused. Fine. So that is why it is said that coping strategies, they matter a lot when you are facing a stressful situation. If the strategies of avoiding stress fail, individuals suffer from anxiety. Again, we suffer from anxiety and we become aggressive. How we can prevent stress? Now, according to Freud, individual unconsciously tries to end his anxiety through defense mechanisms. You are very well familiar, you should be very well familiar with the name of Sigmund Freud, fine, who is known as the father of psychology, and you have studied about his defense mechanisms in first year as well. So just to recall it, that defense mechanisms are strategies that are used by our ego in order to avoid any tense situation. So what is ego? You are familiar with it, that ego is the part of the personality which decides what to do, fine, which solves the problems. So when ego is unable to perform its function, what is the function of solving problem, of coping up with the situation? Then it uses certain defense mechanisms. Now those defense mechanisms are mostly unconsciously used by the individuals. Means that individual is not aware that he is using that particular defense mechanism. So in this way, the symptoms of anxiety and tension are alleviated to a greater extent. All the types of defense mechanisms contain the element of self-deception. Now, why these defense mechanisms are contain the element of self-deception? Because these are not the proper strategies of avoiding any situation. These are not proper solution of solving any particular problem. So we just alleviate the symptoms temporarily for the time being, but their long-term effects are not good because these are not realistic. However, it is effective for time being to relieve anxiety. For the time being it is good, but in the longer run it is not safe. Then if the individual becomes habitual of continuously using defense mechanisms, then anxiety gets worsened, the ego gets disintegrated, it becomes dysfunctional, and we do not become realistic in the appraisal of the situation or problem. Now, stress and illness. Stress plays an important role in ulcer, high blood pressure, and heart diseases. Usually, stress may be the causing factor of these diseases, and if individual is already suffering from these diseases, then stress further worsen these diseases. Somatoform disorders are caused by severe anxiety, which is manifested in the form of physical disease. Now, somatoform disorders, which are now known as somatic symptom disorder, it is a disorder where the individual suffers from physical ailment. There is physical ailment like headache, bellyache, etc. But that physical ailment has no physiological cause. There is no physiological disturbance. It cannot be explained by general medical condition. So usually the cause behind that physical suffering is psychological. So it is treated in the psychological way. So these are the somatoform disorders. And stress can also make an individual type A personality. And in the previous lectures, hope so you remember, we discussed type A personality. That type A individuals are those individuals who are very much ambitious, who are very much workaholic people, who are very much time urgent people, who are all the time who want to complete their tasks in a very well manner and very well in time. So these people, they are type A individuals, and there is not the direct link, but still stress can cause, or it can further aggravate the symptoms of type A personality. Now, there are certain disorders which are related with the stress: acute stress disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, both are quite relevant with one another, except the difference is of time period. Now, acute stress disorder is an unpleasant reaction, intense reaction, which begins shortly after a traumatic experience or event. Soon after experiencing an unpleasant event, just like the death of someone, just like the earthquake, flood, fine. So, soon after experiencing these events, when the individual suffers from unpleasant reaction and intense suffering, and the time period of that suffering is less than a month, then that is acute stress disorder. Now, if the symptoms of that feeling which is unpleasant, it remains longer than a month, then the people they suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Fine, like it occurs when individual has experienced any traumatic experience, and after traumatic experience, the individual shows certain symptoms. Those are the symptoms of, and if those symptoms they remain there longer than a month, then the individual is diagnosed as suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Like in 2005 earthquake, a lot of people, they suffered from PTSD, that is post-traumatic stress disorders, because of that very horrible traumatic experience. So hope so this lecture is clear to you. Fine, if there is any experience, then any problem, then you are most welcome to ask. Okay, Allah Hafiz.